here, we've all heard quite a bit about equity, about equalizing outcomes. We've heard about critical race theory. And one question to ask is, why are these people doing it? What is driving them to make this kind of a insistence on artificially rigged outcomes? Well, the answer can be found by looking at the performance of different ethnic groups on any measure of academic performance or economic success. Let's just take a single example, the Scholastic Assessment Test, the so-called SAT, which you take to get into college. Now, the average score, I'm going to look for a moment at the math section of the SAT, of all test takers in the country is about 510 out of 800. And this score remains fairly persistent over the years, 510 over 800. The average score for blacks, 428, almost 100 points lower. Latinos, a little higher, 457. The average for whites, 534. For Asians, 598. So the Asian score is almost 150 points higher than the black score, and that is on a score of 600, or is it 800 these days? Is the SAT 600 or 800?
I, of all people, would not know that.
Debbie's like, it's been a long time since I've taken the SAT. Well, it doesn't actually matter. The ratios are obvious by themselves. And these ratios are particularly startling at the tail ends of the bell curve. So let me give you an example of this. Among top scorers, actually, here we go. It's 800. For top scorers are people who score between 750 and 800. 60% of those people are Asian. 33% are white. 5% are Latino. 2% are black. So if top schools were to admit on merit alone, that gives you an idea of what the distribution of the class would look like. And at the bottom, it's the opposite, right? If you're looking at bottom scores between 300 and 350, very low scores, 37% of those people are Latino, 35% are black, 21% are white, only 6% are Asian. So the point being, this is why there's so much attempts to hide this, to fix the outcome so that it doesn't. This is, by the way, this is the academic equivalent of what you see in the NBA, right? Blacks, who are about 10 or 12% of the population, are what, 60, 70, 80% of NBA players. So we see huge racial gaps there as well. But in the case of the NBA, nobody says, well, it's time to lower the net every time a white guy goes up to hit the basket. So, but if you did CRT, if you did equity, if you apply the same logic to the NBA, that's what you'd have to do. You'd have to ruin the game in order to produce diversity on the court. And that's what we're doing. We're ruining our academic and even our corporate and economic institutions. Why? In order to produce this forced equity that is by and large trying to pretend that people who are not doing very well need to be moved up so that they're given the same rewards as other people who are doing better. But you might say, wait a minute, isn't it true, Dinesh, that there is really, these race gaps are due to historical discrimination? That if you look at the distribution of income and wealth in the country, by and large, you're going to see whites have the most, Hispanics are in the middle, blacks at the bottom, and guess what? Whites basically control the power structure. Whites are the ones who impose slavery and segregation. So the fact that they're on top is a reflection of historical advantage. I want to show you why that is not true. Here I have in front of me is a list of the ethnic distribution of the most successful groups in the United States. And think of it this way. If America was structured on white supremacy, you'd expect to see whites on top, leading in pretty much all measures of academic achievement and economic success. And then you'd expect to see the other minority groups all bunched together, probably in fairly equal status down at the bottom. In fact, the ethnic group with the highest income in the country, Indian Americans, with an average income of $100,000, $100,500. Next, Filipino Americans, next Taiwanese Americans, next Sri Lankan Americans, next Japanese Americans, then Malaysian Americans, then Chinese Americans, then Pakistani Americans. That's the top 6. White Americans come in after that. And then right after whites, Korean Americans, Indonesian Americans, and then Thai Americans and Bangladeshi Americans. And then down you go, and then lower down you find Nepali Americans, and then Hispanic / Latino Americans, $43,000, African Americans, $35,000. So I ask you, does that look, normally when you look at a distribution, you think the people at the top have been oppressing the people at the bottom. Can we say reasonably that Indian Americans, Filipinos, Taiwanese, and Sri Lankans have been oppressing Hispanics and blacks? That's absurd. And so right there in the very distribution of ethnic success, you see why the idea that differences of ethnic achievement can be blamed either on present or on past discrimination makes no sense.